Redditors who witnessed a murder. What is your story? Part 4. Worked in a pub when I was younger. Walking round cleaning tables and emptying ashtrays. Back in the days you could smoke indoors. And a couple of guys are standing at a high table talking. Another guy comes in and starts shouting with one of the group. Getting a bit heated, so I go over to ask them to calm it down and remove all empty glasses and bottles from the area. As I'm talking to them, the lone guy lunges with a knife. Misses me but goes in the chest of the other. He moves into a bear hug with the guy he just stabbed and continues to stab him a further 14 times in the back before running out the building. Spent what seemed like hours putting pressure on the stab wounds, waiting for an ambulance, but the guy was dead before they got there. Police caught the guy. I gave a statement and spent a few days in court giving evidence and helping get the guy jailed. Not something I ever want to experience again, as it fucked me up for quite some time. It was at a Red Hot Chili Peppers concert in Camden, New Jersey back in the early 2000s. Our high school friend group went down hours before the show to get drunk in the parking lots. The guy across the road from us was selling nitrous balloons out of his trunk. There is what is known as the nitrous mafia in Philadelphia, who basically run the nitrous balloon selling game at all major events. They came by and told this kid to shut his tank off and get off their turf. The kid basically told them to fuck off. About half an hour later they returned. Walked up behind him and slit his throat. Our friend ran and flagged down a bike EMT and we all went into the show. On our way into the show, a group of much older, very drunk Delco trash jumped us and beat us up pretty good because they didn't like what we were wearing, I think. Fucking terrible day. Was riding a bus home from work when I was 18. A car drove past the bus and I thought it backfired a couple times. Glanced outside the bus and saw a man laying on the sidewalk with blood pouring out of his head and 3 guys running down an alley. Bus driver took off and got pulled over by a pair of cops several stops later looking for witnesses. Some of the other passengers saw the guys' faces and stuck around to answer more questions. I didn't witness it, but my dad did when I was young, and I remember being haunted by his story about it over the dinner table. Basically, this teenage kid came running up to his truck and banging on the window asking my dad to let him into the car. My dad had no idea what was going on and didn't open the car. And seconds later the kid started to run away. A car came whipping around the corner and smacked right into the kid, killing him. The driver tried to say it was an accident, but given the speed he was driving in a residential area, and given what my dad saw, the guy was charged with murder. I watched a girl I know stab another girl. The other girl had a knife too. Was surreal watching 2 people stand and stab each other. I called an ambulance. The girl I knew nearly died as the knife hit an artery. Eastern Europe. 2004. Was very young and it was New Year's Day. Right after the ball dropped. I was walking home and I saw 2 Ghanaka threaten a man for his wallet across the street. He didn't give it up and they started jumping him. They beat him very badly and he ended up dying. The only reason I know it is because it was in the newspaper the next day. That's about it. I was driving a taxi years ago, delivering an old lady to her home. Driving by the street where I live. Heard a pop and saw some dude I know drop to the ground, and the shooter ran his pockets and ran off. Dude I knew from around the neighborhood ends up dying from a point-blank shot in the face. Dude who shot him was caught that night. With the money and the gun. Drug deal gone wrong. In the 1980s, I was touring the ship Queen Mary, which was permanently docked at Long Beach, CA. They were hosting a motorcycle show on board that day. And the idiots had hired the Hells Angels as security. Open staircases were attached to the ship on the outside, allowing one to climb from the pavement level to entryways at any level of the ship. I was standing on the lowest landing of the staircase, about 10 feet above ground, when the rival Mongols motorcycle club showed up. Of course a brawl broke out. Immediately below me. With knives, fists, and chains. I saw a Mongol stab a Hells Angel in the back just as a string of police cars were coming over the causeway to break it up. I read in the paper that night that the Hells Angel had been stabbed in the kidney and had died. Surprisingly, it was the only fatality of the brawl. Edit, corrected which club member had killed which. It was this October in Quebec. I was outside and there was a lot of people and a guy with a sword killed 3 person and 2 of them were in front of me. I was scared as shit and I didn't know my body could run that fast for so long. This was not technically a murder, although I felt it should have been considered one. A drunk/drug guy had been kicked out of a pub I was standing outside of. He tried to walk back in a couple of times but the security guard on the door pushed him back. On the third attempt the guard punched him hard in the face. The drunk stumbled back and fell to the footpath. The back of his head hit it first. He was either unconscious or dead at that moment. While the security guard stood and just smugly looked at the guy on the ground, no attempt to call for medical help or just check on the guy, his equally drunk/high girlfriend tried to wake him and pulled him up. I went to stop her but she was off her face and gave me a whack as she pulled her boyfriend up while blood and brain poured out the back of his head. I went and grabbed a cop and gave a statement the next day but no one seemed too interested in looking into the guard's excessive use of force. I was about 12 when this happened. I remember sitting on my back porch with my family while we had a fire or something going. Our family heard a commotion at our neighbor's house that was behind our backyard. We could hear yelling and screaming and things being broken. We thought for sure it was a robbery. But we didn't go inside or called 911 until we heard a final scream. Then about 5 gunshots. We all ran inside without saying a word and called 911. It turns out a woman was murdered by her ex and he did it out of rage or whatever. And at the time that woman was married. But her husband was at work or out of town. It was the talk of our little town. And I actually don't know if they found the guy. I just remember that surreal night. Anyway, thanks for reading. My mom witnessed her boyfriend and boyfriend's brother get murdered. She tells me that all she remembers is being in the car with her BF's brother lifeless body next to her and her BF asking her if his brother was alright. She kept telling him he was safe. He later died in the hospital. When I was around 12. My friend and I were tossing a football back and forth in the street. His parents were having one of their screaming matches when his mother burst out of the screen door. She made it about halfway across the street before there was the boom of a shotgun and down she went. Was valeting and across the street some guys jumped out of a car and started fight a dude. During the scuffle, dude was holding his own against the 3 guys. One of them pulled a gun and pop dude went down. Guys jumped back in the car and sped away. Dude's girlfriend who was with him screamed and draped herself over him. Found out later in the news the guys in the car catcalled the girlfriend. He said something back. They took offense and started the fight. He was an 18 years old, IIRC, kid. Just senseless. I just was in a shock state the rest of the night. Was driving with my sister coming home from a wedding reception. She slows the car down and says there is a body in the road. So she parks her car to block any cars from hitting the body. We get out of the car and a young woman is laying in a pool of blood. Choking on her own blood. Her leg looked like a spaghetti noodle. I heard her gurgle of death. It was awful. Her abusive boyfriend who chased her out of a bar into oncoming traffic came back and sat with her and kept putting his hands in the blood screaming and crying. The car who hit her kept driving. I guess technically not a murder but she was scared and running from abuse and was killed by a hit and run. I remember looking for her story in the news. Her name was Melody and she had very young children. Sitting in an ambulance drinking a peanut butter milkshake from a UDF. It's around 2 to 3 a.m. and we've been up all night. On the sidewalk in front of us 2 guys start to fight. One pulls out a gun and shoots the other point blank many times. He ran. We scooped the dude and drove fast. Pop pop pop. Fireworks on Halloween? That's weird but whatever. Pop pop pop. Oh. It's someone dead in a car. I should call 911. For me. The surprising thing was just how anticlimactic the experience was. It was just surreal. I don't know if they ever caught the guy. But it was a drug-related murder. The murderer was in the car with him so it was probably someone the victim trusted. When I was 13 me and a friend stayed up all night practicing our best Britney Spears choreography when we heard some noise outside. We peeked out the window and saw a man beating up his pregnant girlfriend in their front yard. Then a group of men jumping another off to the side. One pulled out a gun and unloaded into the one guy they were beating up. They then stuffed him in a car and drove away. Police tried to get us to identify suspects in the case, but I could never really be sure on the potential suspects they showed us. The second murder happened on that street just about a year later. We were unloading groceries from our car one evening when these two white males who were loitering on the corner close to our house ran out into the street in front of a moving vehicle and unloaded the gun into the windshield. My mom ran in the house when she heard the gunfire, but I froze like a deer in the headlights. It happened so quickly. When I finally snapped out of it, I ran inside and my mom was calling 911. When police arrived, I saw the shooter speaking to police and called an officer over to let him know what I had saw. Turns out the men were undercover officer in a drug sting. They murdered this man. They never identified themselves as officers to the suspect or anyone. Saw my friend get shot in the head and died a few minutes later during a crossfire between her oldest brother and the police. Was very heartbreaking. I still miss her 22 years later. We were playing on a field next to her house and her brother was watching us. He pulled a gun out. Started shooting as soon as he saw the police. I didn't think this would get a lot of attention. Thank you for all the awards and all the happy cake days. For the ones who posted on here. For some reason I cannot see them on the post. But thank you. Sorry if I have not replied to anyone. Thanks for watching.